This information is for those who want to know more about my martial arts background and my Japanese qualifications. It began in the back streets of Vauxhall in London, and at that time I had no idea how much starting judo would affect my life. In fact, the London Judo Society was one of the first judo clubs in Britain. The club co-founder George Chu was one of the judo pioneers in Britain, but judo was not the only skill taught there. With my father's encouragement, at the age of 10, I trained regularly. As a junior, my instructor Fred Trott balanced our judo training with discipline and philosophy. In the 1960s, I joined the Metropolitan Police. Later, in 1967, I won the British National Police Judo Championships. It was a turning point in my life. I felt compelled to study at the source in Japan. I left Britain by boat to Holland, then took the train to Brest. The next stage was the Trans-Siberian Express. This took about a month travelling across Siberia. It was the only affordable route. Taking into account the Cold War of the 1960s, I can say that there was more than one interesting adventure as the journey unfolded. In the 1960s, Vladivostok was a military port, so the final stage was by boat from Nahodka to Japan, where my training began. My Japanese judo practice began at the Kodokan Judo headquarters near Korakuen in Tokyo. I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Master Kotani by Senator Ichiro Hata. Kotani Sensei took me under his wing and helped me a great deal with judo. Later, I attended his one-year special training course in kata and katsu. Training was far more severe than I'd ever encountered in Britain. Sessions were often 3 or more hours long. Although I'd attained Shodan in Britain, it was not recognized here, so I retook the exam at the Kodokan. My kendo dojo was at the Diet Building. My original teacher, Hayashi Sensei, was 9th Dan. Sadly, he passed away shortly after I returned to Britain in 1971. Senator Hata and Senator Yano were also responsible for my kendo education during my first stay in Japan. Sadly, by the time I returned to Japan in the 1980s, Senator Hata had passed away. It was Senator Yano who continued to further my kendo training. In the 1960s, I used to visit a school in Shimosa Nakayama, where I was allowed to assist in teaching the children. It was fun teaching, and I learned a lot from the experience. In respect of Tomiki Aikido, I sometimes trained in the evenings with Master Tomiki at Waseda University, and in the mornings with Oba Sensei at the Gaien Mai Dojo in Tokyo. This is the Gaien Mai Dojo. On my first visit, I went to a nearby sumo dojo by mistake, and they almost made me join. I was certainly glad to locate Oba Sensei's dojo. This is Waseda University, where I trained in the evening. Team Captain Amakura Sensei is performing the Daisang Kata. I was fortunate enough to have been accepted as a student by Grandmaster Takaji Shimizu of Shindo Musoryu. It was a unique chance to experience the living history of Jojutsu. I trained at both the Tomisaka and Renbukan dojo. Kuroda Sensei was also responsible for my education in Jo. Lessons lasted around 3 to 4 hours. They were intense, but also opened many insights into a much deeper philosophy and purpose. Among the other things I studied within the Ryu was the Uchida Ryu stick jutsu. It was Master Ichitaro Kuroda who taught me Muso Shinden Ryu Iai. I was graded by him and also at one of the first Zen Nihon Iai exams. At the Kenshukan Dojo, I took personal tuition in Seitei Iaido from Master Tomoaki Danzaki. That was a remarkable experience. My main teacher from the 1960s was Kuroda Sensei. Even in midwinter, we often trained on the roof of the police dojo near Korakuen. In the 1960s, Sete Iai was still young, and my main study was Muso Shinden Ryu. My interest in Ryukyu Kobudo led me to Master Seiko Suzuki. He taught me to use the primary Kobudo weapons. Master Suzuki trained under Shinken Taira. I studied at his Shinkoiwa dojo. My training schedule was severe, averaging 10 to 12 hours a day. But fortunately in the 1960s I was young and resilient, not to mention determined. Apart from the skills I achieved downgrade in, there were also other interests. For example, I represented Britain in the first World Kendo Championships in 1970. In the 1960s, I was one of the first Westerners to train in Shorinji Kempo. It was at the Diet Building, and my teachers were Tamura and Murahata Sensei. I attained first kyu in Japan, and was the first Westerner to take part in the 1970 Championships at the Nihon Budokan. My interest in short stick led me to train with Quinton Chambers Sensei. He in turn studied under Master Masaki Hatsumi, who I met on a number of occasions. When I returned to Britain in 1971, explaining my Japanese qualifications just left blank expressions, so in layperson's terms I would say around 40 black belts in 10 martial arts, including weapons from eclectic systems. However, for the benefit of discerning martial arts exponents, I now list my Japanese qualifications, examiners and dates they were attained. Don Drager Sensei helped me a great deal in both Japan and afterwards, right up until he passed away. He was mentor and friend, and I owe him my thanks. I returned in 1971 because the City of London Police wanted my expertise. In the 1980s, I became a registered arrest and search instructor for the American military. I went to Japan at the tail end of an era, gaining my skills from some of Japan's greatest masters. The training was relentless, and grades were earned by Japanese standards. My visits continued through the 1980s. In Britain, my qualifications were not received well in the martial arts world. Instead of at least looking at my achievements, the knee-jerk reaction was to think that so many grades had to be false, although all they had to do was check in Japan. I faced 40 years of innuendo, but that's sometimes how the human race reacts. In life, we just have to accept that. In 1990, because each grade I achieved created more innuendo, I decided not to take any more exams in Japan. After all, the real value lies in experience, knowledge and skill. I founded the Dokuritsu Budo Reme for those few who knew what I had to offer. It has its own autonomy and syllabus. I continue to train as I was originally taught in Japan.